Welcome to the Explainer. Let's just dive right in, shall we? Today, we're going to completely shift how we look at our dogs. As a veterinary behaviorist, I see it all the time. Owners who are just so endlessly frustrated trying to fix a rescue dog's behavioral issues. But what if I told you that the issue isn't obedience at all? It's really not about a refusal to learn. What if instead we stopped hyper-focusing on behavioral symptoms and started looking at the actual science of the nervous system? Today, we're exploring a clinically grounded somatic approach to healing trauma in the rescue dog body. We're going to look way past the standard commands and corrections to understand the deep, autonomic responses that literally dictate how these animals experience the world around them.
So here's our clinical roadmap for today. We'll start with behavior versus survival memory, move into the science of stored trauma, talk about creating a safe zone, and then get into initiating nervous system release, deep release and integration, and finally, wrap up with long-term healing consistency.
All right, part 1, behavior versus survival memory.
You know, traditional training is all about mental learning, right? Getting a dog to sit, stay, or stop barking by correcting their behavior. But here's the thing. With a traumatized rescue dog, we aren't dealing with a stubborn pet. Actually, we're dealing with an overactive sympathetic nervous system. It's totally different. Somatic release focuses entirely on survival memory. It's really about letting go. We are treating a nervous system that had to adapt to constant fear, neglect, or unpredictability just to survive. And even when that dog is finally placed in a safe, loving home, well, their biology just hasn't gotten the memo yet. They're still operating as if danger is right around the corner. This brings us to a really powerful concept. Trauma doesn't only live in the mind. Trauma lives in the body. When a dog spends months or maybe even years in an inescapable high-stress environment, the survival energy from those experiences doesn't just magically evaporate when they get adopted. It gets physically trapped. It gets stored deep inside their muscles, their fascia, and even their breathing patterns. You literally have a dog that is wrapped in its own biological armor. Let's move into part 2, the science of stored trauma. So what actually happens in the body? Well, when an animal faces overwhelming fear, they default to fight, flight, or freeze. But rescue dogs, especially those stuck in cages or abusive situations they simply couldn't escape from, they often enter the freeze response. This is actually a brilliant biological mechanism where the body partially shuts down just to endure the unendurable. But here is our clinical dilemma. If that stress never fully resolves, the body never fully exits that state. The nervous system becomes partially locked. It becomes a state of chronic hypervigilance, where the dog is perpetually bracing for the absolute worst. Now, as a behaviorist, there are specific observable physiological signs I'm always scanning for. You'll see tight fascia, constant muscle bracing, and distinctly shallow breathing. You might even notice unexplained tremors when the dog is just chilling on their bed. Or you'll see this restricted, almost robotic kind of movement, or a really hard flinch when they're touched. Now, these aren't just quirky behavioral traits. They are the literal clinical symptoms of a locked neurological state. If we want to help them recover, we absolutely have to address the physical body itself.
Part 3, creating a safe zone.
Okay, before we even think about doing any physical release work, the environment has to signal absolute safety. Because I promise you, your dog will not let go if they feel even slightly threatened. Step 1, choose a quiet room with soft lighting. No loud noises, no sudden movements. Step 2 is absolutely critical. Avoid direct, intense eye contact. For a traumatized animal that's constantly scanning for threats, direct observation literally feels like intense pressure. And step 3, just sit nearby and purposefully lower your own energy. Your autonomic state directly impacts theirs. And that leads us perfectly into our very first clinical tool, Exercise 1, co-regulation. Sit beside your dog, never hover above them, that's really important, and intentionally slow down your breathing. Deep inhales, slow exhales. Dogs naturally sync up with calm nervous systems. Through co-regulation, our intentional, slowed breathing acts like a biological anchor. It helps the dog feel safe enough to even consider letting their guard down. Moving right along to part 4, initiating nervous system release.
So before we physically touch the dog, we start with exercise 2, scent, grounding, reset. Placing a familiar, safe-smelling blanket near them anchors their brain to the present moment, basically signaling that this specific environment right now is safe. Then we move to exercises 3, 4, and 5, targeting specific anatomical areas. First, the psoas and pelvis. The psoas muscle is deeply, deeply linked to the fear response. By applying just a tiny, rhythmic pelvic rock, we send a physical signal to the lower body that it can finally stop bracing. Next is the hind leg pendulum. By gently supporting and swinging a back leg back and forth, we restore blood flow and neural communication. We're teaching the nervous system that movement is safe again. And finally, softening the tailbase releases tension along the entire back line, unlinking that rigid, locked chain of the spine.
I literally cannot stress this next point enough. True physiological release happens slowly, quietly, and in layers. Seriously, do not rush this. You are diligently helping an exhausted nervous system complete a survival action, like running or fighting that it prepared for years ago but never actually got to finish. It takes immense, immense patience.
All right, part 5, deep release and integration.
So now we get into exercises 6 and 7. For the spine and rib cage, we use a slow motion lure. By very slowly guiding the dog's nose to the side with a treat, we encourage their spine to curve naturally. This lateral stretch essentially mimics the body's natural yawning pattern, which happens to be deeply connected to nervous system discharge. After that, we target the scapula and chest. Fearful dogs constantly brace their front body, almost like a shield. By gently gliding the tissue around the shoulder blades backward, we're dismantling this physical defensive armor. We're telling the brain, hey, you don't need to defend yourself anymore. Now we're gonna activate a real game changer for recovery in exercise 8, the vagus nerve. It's a critical neural pathway that essentially acts as the brakes for the panic response. By performing a belly lift, where you place a hand gently under the dog's belly just behind the rib cage and apply very soft upward support, we directly stimulate this nerve. This forces a biological shift into parasympathetic activation, otherwise known as the rest and digest state. It is the exact biological opposite of panic mode. And you know that parasympathetic shift we just talked about? Well, it often paves the way for exercise 9, guided shake activation, which results in the neurogenic shake. This is a totally natural, spontaneous trembling or shaking mechanism that animals use to literally vibrate out all that excess adrenaline, cortisol, and survival tension. But listen to me, you must never ever force this. If you're doing the gentle spine tracing or hip rocking and your dog begins to shake, do not interrupt it. Don't start enthusiastically petting them. Just stand by calmly and let their nervous system run this crucial reset program all the way to completion. So how do you actually know if this discharge is working? You want to look for these clinical release signals: sudden yawning, incredibly deep exhales, repetitive lip licking, really heavy blinking, sudden sighing, or just seeing their entire body visibly soften. When you see these happen, you move immediately into exercise 10, rest and digest integration. No loud praise, no getting excited, just quiet, soft lighting, and absolute stillness. This right here is where the brain creates the new neural association that it can relax and still be perfectly safe.
Which brings us to our final section, part 6, long-term healing consistency.
Because at the end of the day, healing isn't about forcing a dog to just forget the past. It's about communicating through touch and co-regulation over and over again to help their nervous system realize that the danger is finally, truly over. Over time, this repeated neurological rewiring, it yields some absolutely incredible transformations. You're gonna see way less hypervigilance and significantly better sleep. Their movement will become fluid and softer, completely losing that robotic stiffness we talked about earlier. Their reactivity to loud noises or sudden movements will drop dramatically. And honestly, the most beautiful part is that as they shed this exhausting burden of biological defense, you'll see a massive increase in their natural curiosity and a much deeper, much more authentic emotional connection with you. I want to leave you with a thought to chew on. Next time your rescue dog flinches or paces or just stares blankly into the distance, ask yourself, are you training their behavior or are you healing their survival memory? By shifting your focus from traditional obedience to somatic, nervous system level healing, you hold the power to finally give them the one thing they need most in this world, a body that feels safe enough to rest. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep observing, keep learning, and keep healing.